If there's one thing you should know about Vince McMahon, it's that there isn't just one Vince McMahon. The notorious ex-chairman of WWE has given the world several different variants of Vince. Hell, he wasn't even the first Vince McMahon in his own family. Since Vincent Kennedy McMahon took over the promotion in 1982, WWE has changed with the times, but so has Vince. Whether it's as an interviewer, a commentator, even when he had to lean into white culture and do the whitest thing ever by stealing from black culture, Vince McMahon, despite all the claims of being stubborn and stuck in his ways, constantly evolved throughout his career. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Today, we're going to explore every variant of Vince McMahon and how it all led to the very downfall he was trying to avoid by hiding the real Vince McMahon behind each of these personas. And the major teases from WWE that suggest that man will be back. Subscribe in Swahili. Vince McMahon cut his teeth in the wrestling business as a backstage interviewer for his father's company, the WWF. Vince's base for learning the business came from speaking with its biggest stars. And not just speaking with them, but conducting live performative interviews. Teeing them up to talk trash, feeding them alley-oops to rant against their ops, and say the most popular catchphrases. Vince helped wrestlers showcase themselves through promos designed to highlight their charisma and larger-than-life personas. These very characteristics became the most crucial elements of every Vince McMahon-endorsed pro wrestler, especially the ones who made him money. Superstar Billy Graham, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Ernie Ladd, and even a young Hulk Hogan were interviewed by Vince McMahon, who saw firsthand what it took to be a wrestler, and more importantly, what it took to be a superstar. The crown jewel of Vince McMahon prototypes was somebody Vince never even interviewed in the form of Gorgeous George, a deliberately effeminate pretty boy heel whose whole act revolved around pomp, circumstance, and being above the audience through heel tactics like a male valet who sprayed the ring for incels. By the time Vince bought the company from underneath his father's nose, VKM had the formula to mass-produce marketable athletes at the highest levels of pro wrestling. But even as an owner, Vince McMahon chose to stay behind the scenes and continue his on-the-job training as a commentator. It can be argued that Vince McMahon values commentary more than any other aspect in pro wrestling. A consummate control freak, the role of a commentator is crucial to somebody like Vince, since that's the conduit between the viewer and the action. The commentator is the person shaping the narrative, telling you what to think and why you should think it. Of course, Vince McMahon took a vested interest in commentary, where he'd give rise to the ironically beloved phrase, "What a maneuver! What a maneuver!" Vince McMahon was not the greatest commentator ever. He wasn't even a good commentator. But he knew exactly what to say or what had to be said in order to get his top stars over. Jim Ross was the greatest commentator of all time. It's probably why Vince McMahon terrorized good old JR throughout his WWE stint. The same impulse that made Vince bark into a headset at JR is the same impulse he used to make Trish Stratus bark like a dog. Control. Always control. Even when Vince gave up commentary, he still hovered over commentators from the gorilla position like a micromanaging eagle.
I never have understood Vince's intense animosity. I think he was jealous. He didn't want to give me any credit for helping build the Attitude Era to what it was.
I did not take well to being cursed at on the headset, I just snapped, I snapped and I said, I don't care who you are, how much you're worth, you're not going to talk to me that way ever again.
You snapped at him?
Snapped at Mr. McMahon.
Wow.
I was throwing to a package, blah, 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 something. The Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, throw a package. And he's in my ear and goes, "You fucking ruined it." Screaming at me, telling me that I've ruined this segment because I did not refer to Tyson Fury as the lineal champion.
Vince started yelling in my headset and I elbowed Lawler and I was like, I wrote a note to him. I was like, "Which is the volume button?" And he pointed to it and I turned it all the way down, and his face, he was like, when we took the headsets off after the show, I was like, "Did you not know you could do that?"
It was fun working with Vince. He wasn't going to call a lot of wrestling. And it was kind of different, but at the same time, he was a professional at actually just doing TV. We could joust with each other and blah, blah, blah. And it was fairly easy working with him.
There are two versions of Commentary Vince. Commentary Vince behind the booth and Commentary Vince behind the scenes. Both wielded the same authority, and in the grand scheme of things, that authority came from corporate Vince. Corporate Vince is everything fans would eventually see from the Mr. McMahon character, except in real life. Corporate Vince is every bit as cold and ruthless as any type of Vince. This is a Vince McMahon intent on putting all other territories out of business and turning WWE into a nationwide traveling circus. He succeeded in both these missions. This is a man who came up with the counter-programming playbook after Eric Bischoff and WCW went head-to-head against him in the Monday Night Wars and almost won. Corporate Vince McMahon is a reminder that there is no such thing as a benevolent billionaire. And if you can name one, congratulations, you got worked by a certified pro. Corporate Vince made pro wrestling mainstream in America. He took WWE public and transitioned them into the era of product placement that WWE is in right now. Corporate Vince's checkered sports jacket and hairpiece was the image burned into the brains of Southern wrestling fans on Black Saturday. This is a version of Vince McMahon who fought for his life during the steroid trials of the early 90s. Much like you, every version of Vince McMahon is better off subscribing and hyping this channel. The cutthroat corporate tactics often employed by TKO and even AEW are directly inspired by Vince McMahon.
My dad had a lot of friends, these other, territory owners that owned these fiefdoms, Right. My dad had a lot of friends and acquaintances.
So,
and
in
so
other
forth.
words, you crushed these people.
And I competed with them.
Right. And you won. So what? Big deal.
Crushed them. You put them
That's
out
what
of
you do in business.
right?
Sure.
Yeah, why not?
Every underhanded carny wrestling trick in the book either came from or was revolutionized by Corporate Vince. So when the time was right, it was an easy transition to go from Corporate Vince to Evil Vince. Because honestly, was there ever a difference to begin with? As American society and professional wrestling became more edgy in the 90s, Vince McMahon could no longer ignore the elephant in the room. Over on the other channel, WCW was giving the elephant in the room a bigger push than anybody in the business. Hall and Nash used their real names and heavily implied that they were sent by Vince McMahon to take over WCW. At the time, Vince was still pretending to be a lowly commentator on Raw, and WWE felt behind the times and inauthentic. To keep up, WWE needed to be reality-based too, and they got the perfect opportunity through the Montreal Screwjob. The fallout from the Montreal Screwjob made Vince look like the evil corporate scumbag in the court of public opinion. Vince screwed Brett in Montreal, and no matter how much damage control he attempted in that camo blazer with concealer over his black eye, Vince was seen as the villain. So he ran with it. Vince McMahon coming out as WWE's boss gave the company an A1 villain to feud with some of the biggest stars. And while Corporate Vince started as a smiling figurehead for WWE, it didn't take long before he leaned into all of his evil bona fides in the form of a menacing overlord on camera. Evil Vince was everything you hate about your boss with the volume turned up. He publicly berated talent and underlings. He fired people for sport. He was a billionaire, but his favorite currency was sexual favors. As popular as Stone Cold Steve Austin and even The Rock were at the time, top babyfaces of the Attitude Era needed a three-dimensional, despicable villain to go against. Not the mustache-twirling evil genius you'd see on a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but somebody who was legitimately rotten to their core, who willfully committed real human crimes and either knew they could get away with it or simply didn't give a fuck. This evil Vince McMahon had to be prone to the same crimes that you or somebody close to you is probably doing right now, but their lives just aren't under as much scrutiny, so they get to keep doing it, lucky them. For the evil Vince McMahon character to work, it couldn't be a completely fabricated supervillain who threatened to steal Christmas or run over Superman's baby mama with a train or something. It had to be somebody who threatened to run an actual train on Superman's baby mama. It had to be based on the real-life Vince McMahon. Evil Vince was nothing more than a prelude to the leaked court documents that wrestling fans would read decades later about the real-life Vince McMahon, only to realize he wasn't playing a character at all. Watching a heel Vince McMahon promo or segment from the Attitude Era when he was peak Mr. McMahon is surreal. Every promo, segment, filmed makeout session was always just a worked shoot. It's why Vince McMahon was able to make a comeback in 2023, feeble as it was. Because more than any Vince McMahon variant, Evil Vince was able to blur the lines between himself and the Mr. McMahon character. No different than the ventriloquist who swears that the dummy is racist, not him. Of course, no heel can be as evil as Vince McMahon without getting his comeuppance, and that comeuppance often came in the form of a wrestling match. Vince McMahon, even as an executive in his 50s, began his wrestling career as part of his iconic feud against Stone Cold Steve Austin. But Vince wasn't just any figurehead in a wrestling match. Vince McMahon was jacked. In fact, he had one of the best physiques in the business well into his 60s. Wonder how that happened. It's why Stone Cold hated wrestling Vince.
I'd never really taken steroids before. I was introduced to them, and it was, oh, come on. And this is probably the way most everyone gets started on them. It's like, ah, come on, try it. You'll see a tremendous difference in your physique, or whatever the case may be. They were certainly not illegal at the time, so I tried it.
I just saw you with your shirt off, and you're charismatic.
He's clumsy, he's not graceful. He really spun up and learned the patience process, letting moments build, working the crowds. That guy picked on to the business really quickly. And I was just always mad that when he came to the ring, he was more jacked up than I was.
As a wrestler, Vince McMahon has more accolades than a lot of the top stars who worked for him. Vince is a former WWE champion, a Royal Rumble winner. He competed in 5 WrestleManias and even won the ECW World Championship, which led to the birth of quite possibly the most entertaining version of Vince McMahon, Durag Vince. After Vince McMahon was forced to shave his head bald at the hands of Bobby Lashley and Donald Trump, Vince's feud with his next big black star resulted in McMahon antagonizing Lashley through the culturally appropriated gimmick of Durag Vince. I don't give a fuck what anybody say. I will never watch Durag Vince at any time and not laugh. He was so over the top. He knew how lame he looked in a durag, or at least the writers did, and they played into it for laughs. He wasn't actually trying to ingratiate himself into black culture. He was aggressively using it to try to make himself look cool and fumbling miserably. This isn't what it was trying to be, but Durag Vince in hindsight is a brilliant satire of how corporations who couldn't give 2 shits about the black experience try to use black culture to make their brands relevant. At least that was my biggest takeaway from Durag Vince. Durag Vince feuded with Bobby Lashley during the dying days of WWE ECW, though one could argue that every day of WWE ECW was a dying day. As ECW lay dying, WWE did what every business does when it loses its edge and becomes lame: lean on black culture.
When he won the ECW title and he came in wearing a durag, I was like, bro.
That version of Vince McMahon was ridiculous. Durag Vince.
What up, G? What's up, Holmes? That is fly, baby. That's fly right there. You want some of this? You want some of this, huh?
Everything from Vince McMahon's durag to his broken AAVE to the fact that he was feuding with a popular black babyface was all WWE's attempt to use black culture to boost ECW. And while it did keep the company afloat, Bobby Lashley was a big fish in a small pond and inevitably moved on to the main roster, while the likes of Mark Henry and Ezekiel Jackson tried to pick up the pieces and keep ECW relevant. After the Durag Vince era, Vince McMahon defaulted to his evil Mr. McMahon character for sporadic feuds. His incredible match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 22 was born out of McMahon trying to coax HBK to go back to his old ways of drugs and pill popping. The Mr. McMahon character stuck around throughout the summer for a not-so-incredible feud against the new and not improved DX. Vince's last proper WrestleMania match came against Bret Hart in 2010, and he seldom wrestled after that. McMahon tried to recreate the Stone Cold Mr. McMahon dynamic during WWE's all-hands-on-deck mission to get Roman Reigns over as a babyface. That tumultuous task didn't work until Reigns turned heel during the pandemic, formed the Bloodline, and did so well it finally became cool to cheer him. Reigns' Bloodline arc might have worked too well because WWE is trying to repackage the Bloodline all over again, and honestly, it's starting to feel like reheated French fries. The Bloodline and Cody Rhodes finishing his story were Vince McMahon's last 2 great angles. They're also 2 of the most important angles to the history of WWE's business. They're the angles that brought WWE back from the doldrums of not only the pandemic era, but the senile era of terrible booking from Vince McMahon himself. But after retiring in 2022, Vince McMahon came back for one final reign of terror. It seemed like he was going to get unilateral power after selling WWE in 2023. TKO Vince had a mustache. It's funny because amid all the accusations of sexual misconduct, the IRL Vince McMahon had somehow become a caricature of the mustache-twirling villain that he wasn't during his peak years as a heel. TKO Vince sat shoulder to shoulder with super agent Ari Emanuel, and both insisted that Vince was in charge of WWE and had final say.
The new company will have Mr. Emanuel as CEO, with current WWE CEO Nick Khan staying on as president of the brand. The wild card throughout the bidding process was what role, if any, WWE founder Vince McMahon would play in a new company after a sexual misconduct scandal. McMahon was forced to retire thereafter. He left the company for nearly 6 months. Most had assumed McMahon would leave altogether if a deal happened. He is staying on as executive chairman of the board at the behest of Emanuel himself.
It's a great day. You know, things have to evolve. Family, business, it all has to evolve for all the right reasons. And this is the right business decision. Thus far, it's the right family decision.
That was until the Janelle Grant lawsuit became his final nail in the coffin. After being forced to step down as chairman and CEO of WWE, Vince McMahon is now an unemployed, salt and pepper silver fox with Botox. You can never ever count Vince McMahon out. He delivered a eulogy at Hulk Hogan's funeral, and it was featured on a Netflix documentary, for Christ's sake. Both Triple H and Stephanie McMahon spoke lovingly about Vince in back-to-back years when they were inducted into the Hall of Fame. When The Rock and John Cena are inevitably inducted, they'll do the same.
I've got to talk about it, and that's Vince. I love you, Vince. And thank you.
My father, Vince McMahon.
I don't think we've seen the last of Vince McMahon on WWE television, and if we have, WWE will do everything they can to lionize his memory and brainwash fans into thinking he was just a misunderstood, eccentric billionaire. One who had the same flaws as billionaires like Tony Khan, whose family donates to white supremacists, and who may or may not employ bot farms to terrorize anybody with AEW criticisms. But that's a whole other story. Maybe we'll do all the variants of Tony Khan one day, but that'll just be 2 variants. The message board incel Nepo Baby before he bought AEW, and the message board incel Nepo Baby after he bought AEW. As for Vince McMahon, he's still seen out and about in retirement. A wild Vince appeared at a Knicks game. Birthday parties, funerals, Hulk Hogan documentaries, totaling his Bentleys, anything to keep his name out there. We talk extensively about Vince McMahon on this channel, and for more on the lawsuit that ended him, check out this video.